Yes, I'm live now. Hi and welcome back to another episode of Karim Talks About Economics, and it's episode 21. Karim Talks About Economics, as I've now said 21 times, is a podcast um, by me, the host, Karim, where I talk about economics and I try to talk about a lot of things that relate to the society that we live in today, and I try to relate them to economics. Now, economics is a lot of things. It might be the behavior, it might be the money, it might be the international relationships, right? It might be about democracy, it might be about the inequality, it might be about a lot of things. And that's why economy is such a lovely thing to study, and why I am giving you a small portion of your time where you endeavor with me in a journey where we expand our horizon and we discuss some things and relate them to economics. Yes. So, this podcast is characterized by three things: that it is spontaneous, it's informative, and it's open minded. It's spontaneous in the sense that it is more of a discussion than a presentation. So, what happens is that I describe some things, I present some things, but while I do that, right? And also sometimes we have some other people with us, and sometimes we also read. So while I do that, there might be a tangent, right? We might go through a tangent, but then we'll return back, and this tangent is allowed because it's spontaneous. Now sometimes we also don't know where we want to end up, right? Because not everything is planned. And that's the lovely thing about this podcast. We go through the direction that makes the most sense rather than having a fixed schedule and a fixed plan of the things that we need to discuss today. Now, the podcast is also informative. So, yes, this is entertainment. However, there also needs to be a value in this entertainment, not only a waste of time. So, I try to add some more knowledge to myself, firstly, by talking to different profiles and also by reading different books and then reflecting on these things, right? And for you guys, I suppose you come with me through this journey and I think out loud, and you're actually also much encouraged to write to me, right, in the comment section. Actually, it's a live comment section, so this can become a dialogue if we really prefer this kind of interaction. Now, thirdly, it's open-minded, and it is so because I'm not enclosed in a specific ideology or a specific agenda that I want to promote, but I would rather try to see things from different points of view, and therefore I also question myself as I go along a lot. And also another reason why I bring on some people on the podcast to understand their point of view on things, and that will of course question my point of view and then expand on my horizon and hopefully also expand on yours. And that's the open-mindedness of this podcast. Now the podcast is usually scheduled in the following way. First, we start with some news, and those are the headlines of today, together with the new numbers of the COVID-19 pandemic. Then, there is a follow up from last time, which is usually a question that we answer together, that was proposed in the previous podcast. Okay, and then there is um, this main part of um, of the podcast, which consists either of reading a small section of a book. Maybe at some point it will be something else than a book. Maybe it's a scientific article or something like that. However, I think that would be too advanced. Or maybe it will be a presentation at some point, right? If some of you would like to know what I've written my master thesis in, or my bachelor's thesis, or we we bring on someone that also has written those and want to present them, well, then that is what this part of the podcast will consist of. And sometimes, yes, as alluded to, we also have some other people, and that's a substitute to the reading. So the idea is that in this part, that's where the expansion and the challenging of our mindset and worldview really is, or comes to be questioned, or is put into question, right? And then at the next part of the podcast, we summarize these thoughts, all the new thoughts that we've come up with, either by listening to someone make a presentation, or uh, discussing things with an interviewee, or reading something. And we also propose this new question, so something that have really that we can not really answer today, but we need some time to think about, right? Maybe not explicitly, but maybe subconsciously. And after that, we have a Q&A session, or that is the explicit Q&A. However, you are allowed and very much encouraged to give me your questions as we go along. Today's podcast might actually be a little bit shorter than other podcasts, so it might be closer to 1 hour rather than 2 hours. And the reason for that will be to increase the quality of these podcasts. So, firstly, I've thought about dividing the podcasts, right? So maybe those people that are only interested in the news can get that section. Those that are interested in the main part, the reading, can get that section. And those that are interested maybe in the motivation can also get that section for themselves. Or maybe those who want to hear a small summary of the podcast can also get that as a section. However, the podcast as its entirety and in its full length will also be available on YouTube, and I think I will also try now to put it on Spotify and other podcast and streaming services. And without further ado, I will now start with the first part of the podcast, which is the questions. The news. Excuse me. Yes. Any questions? No. Okay. So as per usual, for our concurrent viewers, you know that the first thing we do is to look at the new COVID-19 numbers. Now we see that we're now at 14,300,000. Not a very large increase from yesterday. However, it is a 200,000 increase. And with respect to the deaths, as expected, it hit 600,000 today. And the recovered is at 8,500,000, which is good, which of course leads to the below numbers, that the death rate is of this virus is still 7%, as alluded to in other podcasts. This means that the virus has neither become stronger nor weaker, which is for now a good thing as more people are getting infected. Of course, it could be nice if it became a little bit lower. And you can see that the serious and critically ill at the bottom left is still at 1%, which is promising, as that is also a number that has not increased or changed that much. Now, yes. Now we consider the specific countries. Okay. So as you can see, the United States is still at the top, and these are the numbers from yesterday, because today's numbers have still not been deliberated, or rather not been sent into their uh, full account. And the United States is still, yes, at the first place. Let's say it, America first, or something like that. So they are at 74,000, nearly 75,000, which is a small increase from yesterday. Deaths 946, small, I think, decrease from yesterday. However, not a significant one. Brazil, a significant decrease, but that might be because, of course, of the beginning of the weekend bias, as we have described. That in the weekend, people are either being tested less, or the data is not sent in time. And that's why it's at uh, nearly 34,000 actually. However, these are the numbers for Friday, so I don't know how much of a weekend bias it is, but maybe Friday also is a day in Brazil where people don't maybe go to the hospitals, or a day where people get free a little bit earlier, get off their job. I mean, a little bit earlier. India is very much stable with the number from yesterday, 34,000, nearly 35 actually. So they're actually above Brazil for the first time. I wouldn't say that that's a good sign for India. However, I wouldn't say that they're also gonna do much worse than Brazil. However, they do have the potential, because there is, as you can see at the very right column, um, approximately 6 times more people living in India than in Brazil. If we look at Russia, again, I will tell you this is quite interesting. Why? Because the number of cases is very much close to that of yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that. That puts into question how come they can have so low discrepancies between one day and the other. South Africa is back at the 13,000s, and Mexico 6,000, so a small improvement. However, as we can see, Mexico is back at the third place. No, actually not. Okay, fourth place for the most deaths at 668. Very much close to India, that is at 676. Right? So only a difference of 8 there. However, the number of cases um, are quite significantly different from one another. Nearly a third in Mexico compared to India. So maybe the virus is different in India than in Mexico. Also, the total deaths in Mexico are higher than those in India, right? Either because of the lag, as we've described, that people get ill and then their case becomes worse and worse and worse, or maybe the virus is just different. As we see, also the death rate in the United States is quite high, and in Brazil is quite high. So that might allude to the fact that in the Americas, maybe the virus is stronger than in Asia, if we can trust the numbers coming out from India and China and Russia and the like, and Iran for that matter as well. Now, however, Chile is giving us some promising numbers, right? As you can see. However, they have a large number. Now, Africa is also doing pretty well with the death rates, but however, South Africa, I mean, um, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's correct. Maybe it is correct. Now, a country that we've also expressed some concern about is Spain, which is now at 1,400 cases a day, and Colombia at the bottom is again at nearly 9,000 cases, and the deaths there do not look very good, right? It's a little bit weird how the deaths are so different from one another in the countries, right? So in some you have a spike, and in some others you don't. So the UK there has 45,000. However, Iran, which is very much close to the exact numbers, and Spain are also much lower than that, right? So Spain is approximately, I would say, they have what we'd say 66% of the UK deaths, and Iran has approximately a third. Realistic? I don't know. It's just a little bit weird and something to take notice of. Now, of course, this might also allude to the fact that Iran, Iran and Spain have really tested a lot, and they have really got the numbers of the true um, infected correctly, right? And the UK has not. So there is a lot of people that have the condition, however, they have not tested positive. However, considering the third column from the left, we see the total tests that those countries have made, right? And the UK has nearly made 13 million tests, while Iran has only made 2 and Spain has only made 6. And the population of Iran is is much it is much larger than that of the UK. And in Spain, yes, the population is lower, but however, it's um, the ratio of the tests are not equivalent at all, right? So that's something to take notice of. Yes, France is also a country that we are also a little bit concerned about. Excuse me. As we'll see in one of the news, I think, or if not, France also has another news that is a little bit bigger than the one I will be telling you about, which is about the burning of a church um, or a cathedral. And that news is that masks from Monday are mandatory in all closed areas in France, so in shops and things like that, as is as it is in Germany actually. I heard that at least from my brother, that when they go to, and he's in Berlin right now, I'm a little bit scared for what might happen to him. Um, However, he says that he's doing fine. Yes. So yeah, in Germany you have to wear it in restaurants and you have to wear it in shops and things like that. Yes. So if you consider the Al Jazeera first, I suppose the news about some people going to be tested for COVID or something like that, that is of course going to come in the news if they are um, highly political um, or highly ranked in the political system of a country. Um, Other news related, at least to COVID, that is the idea that the masks and the opening of schools have become a political issue rather than a health issue now, and it's about giving people the freedom not to wear the mask, right? So that's why people that's at least from my understanding, that's the discussion in the U.S. Is it freedom if we allow people to wear masks? No, it's taking the freedom from them. The question is, what kind of freedom are you taking from them? The freedom to get COVID 19 and to spread COVID? I don't know, but for them, they feel that it's it's a big thing, because it's covering their faces, and I suppose they are very much against covering their faces because it's a freedom that I can see your face or something like that. I suppose, or the freedom that I can't breathe, but it doesn't make sense because we know that you can't breathe whilst uh, wearing a mask. Now, another thing that's up here is that Mali is still demonstrating for a new leadership, and we know that this is a big thing because Mali is a country that is already hit hard with political. I wouldn't say political issues actually, but I'd rather say security issues because they do have a lot of terrorist organizations living in their country. So making demonstrations makes sense. Yes, we're against our regime. However, maybe those organizations will try to gain control over the country if the military is not strong enough. And usually, African countries don't have a strong military except Egypt and maybe South Africa and Nigeria. However, Nigeria also have a lot of terrorist organizations, and so does Egypt, right? Uh, South Africa seems to be doing quite fine. However, they are quite hardly hit by COVID, and they will not be demonstrating for now, and they will be staying at home, I suppose. Okay, so if you go further to BBC, here's the news. Um, Nantes Cathedral, and they say that there actually might be this fire might be started explicitly by some people, so not by random, right? As we saw with Notre Dame, and that's I don't know if this is related to any criminal activity. I hope not, right? But it seems as for the moment a lot of churches are being hit. So the well, not churches really, because the thing that happened in Turkey was not really a church, but however it was considered a church at some point in time. But I don't think there is any relationship there. Now another thing that we see at the bottom, let's take the bottom left first. COVID-19 in Catalonia is increasing, as we saw that Barcelona has from yesterday has put in place the 10 people rule, that social gathering can be of max 10 people. So we know that. However, we now know that Catalonia is the place that is mostly hit by COVID-19 now. That's of course not something that we want. However, we know that maybe people in Spain are more lenient to wear masks and to work through this than in America. Hopefully, hopefully, I'm hopeful. If we consider the bottom right, that relates to another news that we had a couple of days ago that um, Russian state-backed Russian hackers were involved in stealing some information about the vaccine development in the UK. However, both the presidential office and now the Russian ambassador in the UK have said that those are wrong claims and that Russia have done nothing of the sorts. Now, of course, they have to say that, and then on the other hand, as I said, I think also explicitly, I don't see this as a big issue, as I hope that countries can come together to develop this vaccine together, right? And people should not, of course, be stealing from one another, but collaborating with one another. Now, there might be some financial involved with it that Russia doesn't want to pay, or there might be some security that the EU does not want to share with Russia. However, when this virus is, and I will now you'll now hear me say the exact same words as the WHO president, as the virus does not discriminate between people, we should not discriminate with the vaccine. Well, he did not explicitly say that, but that the virus does not discriminate is something that I took directly from him. This is CNN, and we see again something with COVID, a couple of them actually. Um, we see firstly a young person that have been hit with COVID. However, she have yet not been able to. Well, when she got COVID, she was apparently hardly hit, and something happened to in her lungs. Her lungs got weaker, and she now has to take treatment. And apparently, she have not been able to get off this treatment, right? Which means that COVID might be something that has a long-term effect on the human body. Central top, we see that um, Bollywood actors, so people in India, actors in India, high-ranking people in India, people with a lot of money, have now got COVID. This is the second family that we hear about. This means that India, the COVID-19 in India also does not discriminate between the wealth of the different people. It hits every part of the society. And then at the bottom right, as you see, this is an analysis. This is not really a news, so this is more of a opinion. It says that Britain doesn't have the strength to take on China, which mean which we've seen explicitly when they said that we will be taking refugees from Hong Kong, and also when they said that we will, you now, when they said to Huawei, now you have to remove um, your antenna technology, such and thus not allowing them to have 5G in the UK. So those are some things that the UK has done. However, apparently CNN does not believe that they are strong enough as and I suppose here the reason would be that the bargaining position in the trade or the benefits that exists between the relationship of China and Britain um, are more weighted on China, so China has the upper hand apparently, maybe in the opinion of CNN. Now, of course, the idea here may also be that um, okay, Britain can't do it alone. They need some help from other nations. They need the US to stand with them, and they need the EU to stand with them. Okay. If we consider the Guardian, I suppose that's yeah. Here's where I got that masks in France are going to be compulsory, mandatory, i.e. mandatory. Yeah, and also you see the news about France, and also you see John Lewis has died at 80 years old. That news have also been all around. Um, I don't consider it significant for this podcast. Maybe significant for a lot of people, however, not for the interest of this podcast. Also because I didn't know him that much. So that's also a part of it. However, you here see him hand in hand with ex-president, I suppose, the previous president, Barack Obama of the United States of America. Now, I wrote something here on my notepad because there's a news that I've not been able to see, or I've not been able to screenshot for you, which happened a couple of days ago, and I thought about again today, which is that Twitter has been hacked. and it's something that and the thing was that um, yes, the thing was a lot of not high ranking, but I would say famous people, their profile got hacked, and then there was an idea that people had to send them Bitcoin or they had to press a link, and from that there was an opportunity to get some Bitcoins. But the only thing you had to do was to send a little bit of cash to open up the account or something like that, and that was how the hacking was done and how people got scammed. Of course, it's a big thing because Twitter is a really big social media, and if that can be hacked, then I suppose everything can be hacked, and it puts into question the real amount of privacy that people have when they sign up for these services or networks, right? Another news here on The Guardian, which I've not seen anywhere else, however, I've got a lot of notification and seen some small videos about it, is that in Portland, there are some military people that comes in, maybe it's the National Guard or something like that, it comes in and removes some demonstrators without saying anything. They just come, take the person, puts him or her in the car, and then drives off. And they are wearing this military uniform. So there is something happening to stop the demonstrations and maybe detaining people in the U.S. into a high a high degree, right? And that goes in the direction that I don't know if I've said it in this podcast. However, I have talked with a lot of people about it. The idea that, or the idea that questions the U.S. legitimacy to stand up for people's privacy in other countries when privacies and the freedoms of the people living in the US is being stolen from them, right? So how can I talk bad about a president that um, tries to end demonstrations in other countries if I'm doing it myself? So how can the US tell Iran, hey, listen to your people, listen to the people on the streets, when the United States president did not listen to the people on the streets himself, right? So that puts into question the legitimacy of the American leadership in calling for freedom um, of people and the liberty of people all over the globe, right? That's something that's a little bit scary because right now it seems that the power is vacant. The superpower is vacant, right? It's a position that's vacant right now, especially also with the coronavirus and the idea that not Trump, but the United States has done not so great of a job, while China has done a great job. On the other hand, at least on paper, right? I think that's it for that part of the podcast. And now we're gonna head into the question from last time. Now you're going to see something interesting that I've not had in the other podcasts, which is the question. Uh, yeah, now you're going to see how I do this. Oh, actually, you can't. Yeah, but I put a question mark. Yes, so the question is actually on the screen now. And it reads out: what is the power of nations and how does it relate to the product of land and labor? And this question was asked because Adam Smith has a quote where he says the power of every country must always be in proportion to the value of its annual produce. And that was, of course, related also to trade. Okay, so what is, and then I put into question, well, what is actually the power of nations? And he also discussed a little bit of political economy. And political economy, as alluded to in episode 20 of this podcast, is more about voting and about the division of resources and public goods in a country. So within the country, there's nothing to do with, or at least the part that I was taught, has nothing to do with international trade. It has nothing to do with the power balance between one country and the other, right? Now, of course, you could actually do it if you had a union that can be considered as a country, and that union can tax all the countries, and they then have to come to an agreement, and that union provides a common good. So maybe NATO provides a common good, which is the military, right? So yeah, that might be a part of it. However, he used it in a slightly a different way. So first of all, let's kind of think, well, what is the power of a nation, especially when we compare it with other nations, right? Because what is the power of nations? Well, okay, so that's the power of every country. What is the power of nations? It's not the military power. It could be, but I don't think it is in economic terms. Maybe it's the power of trade, right? But what does that mean? What does that really mean? And how come that it relates to the proportion of the annual produce of a country? Well, let's think about it. Let's think about it. Let's think about it. So, power of every country must always be in proportion to the value of its annual produce. What is the power of a country? Because you're comparing countries, right? And you're saying that a more wealthy country has more power. Now, we also know that from today, right? But why is it so? Is it because they can then maybe export more, and therefore the other country will want to import from that country? However, if I know that I want to import from you, that gives me the power, not you. Me, not you. Maybe if I do like this, you can see my fingers. I use my hands to express myself, at least for now. I think that's too bad. Okay, let's do it like this. So what is the power of a country? What is the power of nations? And how is it related to the annual produce of that nation? So I don't think it's the military in this part, because it's the produce. And produce relates to productive labor. While, as we know from previous readings in the book, in the section about productive and unproductive labor, military is actually unproductive labor because it does not produce significant product. So that cannot be what he means when he says the power of a nation. Now, the idea here, because I also thought about, well, what if, subconsciously in it right now, what if it's related to the wealth of the country, right? But usually you would do that, and it makes more sense to consider it as the GDP per capita, right? Because then you're more rich and you have more money to spare for the import of products from outside your own country. However, I wouldn't expect that Denmark has more power than India, even though people in India are much more, I would say, much more poor, but much less wealthy than in Denmark is maybe a better way of putting it, right? Per capita. However, India is much stronger. Is that because of their military, or is that because of the actual number of products that they are producing? Now, it is because of the actual number of products that they are producing, at least in what we are concerned. But why? Why is that so? Well, they are not. Let's assume that they are producing products, right? Now, I know that India is exporting products. I know that. I know that for sure. However, let's assume that they are not. Let's assume that the products that they are producing is produced for their population. However, they are still poorer per capita, GDP per capita, than compared to Denmark. But the statement here would still mean that India has more power because the total produce is more than that of Denmark. Is maybe is it maybe because of the number of people? Well, no, because the marginal product of a laborer in Denmark is much higher than that of an Indian. So it's not that either. So the power of every country must always be in proportion to the value of its annual produce. You can hear some people in the background because there's, I suppose, some people partying, some young people partying. No, I'm young, but I don't know these particular people. Okay, but the so yeah, let's consider Denmark and India. Why is India more powerful than Denmark? Is it because of the people? Is it because of the export? It's not because of the people, and it's not because of the export. It's because of they are producing more, but why? They are not producing more per capita either, right? What is it that makes India more powerful than Denmark? And it has to relate to something with the annual produce. Why is it that the annual produce relates to the power of the country? Because it shouldn't, right? Because let's make this hypothetical example again. We're still with India and Denmark, but the hypothetical example that India is not exporting anything, it only produces what it produces today, but for the home home trade rather than the foreign trade, right? Which would make the most sense, at least in Adam Smith's book number 2, because that's how you increase um, the nation's wealth. That's how you can best spend your capital. Now, of course, today we'll be discovering something new about why that does not happen. But however, for this example, let's assume that that's happening. Now, Denmark in this example is producing much. It's not producing much more than India, but it's producing much more with respect to the to the per capita, and therefore it can therefore export some produce to India. Now, India would buy from Denmark. That's of course this goes against the Ricardo, because in Ricardo they will specialize in two different products and only produce one product and then trade with one another. But in this example, Denmark has produced much more, or the Hexa-Olin model, excuse me, and then sending the rest to India for trade, such that they can get more capital and then maybe produce more. Okay. Good. We can, yeah, invest the capital and then improve agriculture and improve manufacturing and transport. Okay. Would that make Denmark more powerful? Well, apparently not in this sense, right? And we know that from today, India is more powerful than Denmark. Now, of course, not considering Denmark as a part of the European Union or considering Denmark as a part of NATO, but considering Denmark as for Denmark alone, the 5 million inhabitants. But what does it mean that you're more powerful? Does it mean that if you go into a war with one another, you would win? That's not what it means in this context, because we have to get that out of our heads, because that's usually how we think of power. It's if push comes to shove, who will survive and who will not. That's not what power means here. So I think we need to define what power actually means. And that is actually what we're trying to do with this question. Uh, we spend a long time on this question so far, but we've gotten nowhere. We've gotten nowhere yet. So what's the power? What's the power? Why is it that if I'm producing 5,000 and I have 5,000 inhabitants and you're producing 500 and you have 500 inhabitants, I'm still more. Okay, I don't think that makes sense. If you have 500 inhabitants and you're producing 500 and I'm producing 5,000 or 500 and I no 5,000 and I have 50,000 inhabitants, I'm still more powerful than you. However, I'm much more poorer per capita, right? However, my GDP would be above yours. Interesting. Would I ever be able to trade with you? Well, apparently I'm not as productive as you. So why would you? Well, you would sell to me. However, how would I ever pay you? Because if I could pay you, why haven't I invested in myself first? Can only be if I'm producing something else. So you see, this is not actually an easy question. This has become very intricate. It's become very intricate. So what is the power of nations? And how does it relate to the product or the annual product of a country or to the product of land and labor? Why is it that India is more powerful than Denmark? I'm not gonna say that I don't know the answer, because I need to have some kind of, like, some reasoning for what's happening in the world, right? For the observation that exists. My observation would be that India is more powerful. Why is it? I'm still the military thing. I cannot get that directly out of my head, but I know I have to get it out of my head. Uh, why is it more powerful? Why is it that if de- but why is it that if Denmark and India goes into a trade deal, that India would have more bargaining power? Because I'm in less need, but India is in more need for the trade than Denmark. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because Denmark has to really persuade them to buy their product. But that does not relate to the amount of the annual. Okay, to the value of its annual product, proportion to the value of its annual product. So the power of every country. So maybe I've read this wrong. Let's see. So the power of every country must always be in proportion to the value of its annual product or produce. So the value of its annual produce. No, it's still the same. But when he proposed this idea, right, and he discussed which country would be trading more, he said that it is always the richest country, and here he meant by per capita, I think, because it doesn't make that would be trading the most, and he gave the idea of Holland and the UK, right? So Holland was trading the most because it's the most, well, it's the wealthiest country. However, is it the wealthiest country or is it the wealthiest per capita? I think it's the wealthiest per capita. Where will I find it? Do you think I will find it, guys? Okay. The part of the capital of a country which is employed in carrying trade is altogether withdrawn from support, though it might be replaced by every operation. Two distinct capitals, yet the capital of the Dutch merchant, which cares. Holland in proportion to the extent of the land and the number of its inhabitants. By far the richest. Okay, so yeah. Um, yes, per capita. Okay. But when he said this, so the riches and so far the power depends upon riches and power of every country must always be in. Okay, so the capital therefore employed in the home trade of every country will generally give encouragement and support. And now I'm rereading something from yesterday in order to be able to answer this question. I know this has gone too far, but I really need to understand this properly. Okay, so the capital, therefore, employed in the home trade of any country will generally give encouragement and support to a greater quantity of productive labor in that country and increase the value of its annual produce more than an equal capital employed in the foreign trade of consumption. And the capital employed in the later trade has, in both these respects, still a great advantage over an equal capital employed in the carrying trade. The riches, and so far as power depends upon riches, and here comes the quote, the power of every country must always be in proportion to the value of its annual produce, the fund from which all taxes must ultimately be paid. So maybe that's basically what he meant. So the power of every country comes from the power of the government. Okay. So yes, that yeah comes, and I didn't even need to end because now my ideas are flowing. Okay, so it comes from the power of the government, um, and the government is more powerful the more resources it has And yeah, the more resources it has, more annual produce. Now, of course, this really depends on the tax rate, but I suppose he assumes that all the tax rates are the same. Um, More annual produce leads to higher tax revenues and therefore more powerful. And the idea is, yeah, yeah. And how does this relate? Let's just make sure. Maybe there's something other interesting that he will be saying. Riches, okay, ultimately be paid, but the great object of the political economy of every country is to increase the riches of and power of every country. It ought therefore to give no preference nor superior encouragement to the foreign trade consumption above the home trade, nor the carrying trade above either of the other two. It ought neither to force nor to allure into, yes. So that's it. And how does it relate to land and labor? Well, taxes today are more lenient to cover land rather than labor. Why? Because labor is now very mobile, right? So executive board members can come from different nations. However, the land is something that cannot be transported um, across nations, and therefore, if I put a tax on, and that's why I thought that tax for Fox that or the news that was presented in Fox News a couple of I think now weeks ago was quite interesting, and that's I think the only time that I thought that Fox News had actually something to offer. Was that they are going to increase the taxes on the dwellings, which makes more sense than increasing them on individuals. So maybe increasing the product of land is better for the country than increasing the labor, because land can be taxed much more than labor. However, I think that at the end of the day, you want to increase the product of labor as you have as you want to increase again the amount of money that the laborer, i.e., the worker, has, and therefore he can save, as alluded to, more of that, and by saving more, he can invest also more in the future, and with doing that, there will be some growth in the country. Yes, I think that's it. That does it for the follow up from last time. And now we're gonna go into a reading session that I don't think will be very long. However, it is going to be very interesting. Okay, let me take a sip of my coffee. You can listen to the girls and the boys in the background. A sip from my water. And now you're back to my lovely voice. Let me first see if there is any questions. There are none. Okay. And the name of and we actually reach a new book, right? And the title is of the different progress of opulence in different nations, right? Of the different progress of opulence in different nations. And recall that opulence means greatness. So basically, this book will let us know how different countries have become prosperous. And then the first chapter has the following title: of the natural progress of opulence. So maybe he says that there is a theoretical way for how countries become rich, or a general way for how they become rich, and then he will go into more specifics into how they have become more rich. And I can only already tell you not what chapter 2 is going to be about, but maybe what chapter 3, what the title of chapter 3 is. Okay, maybe I'm just going to let you know what chapter 2 is. So, of the discouragement of agriculture in the ancient state of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Then chapter 3, of the rise and progress of cities and towns after the fall of the Roman Empire. So today we're going to be more general, and then we're going to go into the Roman Empire, my boys and girls. Okay. Maybe some water will help. Definitely help. But actually, with doing these podcasts, I've really noticed that my throat sometimes hurts because I'm talking for 2 hours straight. I also think that today will be maybe close to 2 hours because I'm quite excited. After all, okay, let's see. The great commerce of every civilized society is that carried on between the inhabitants of the town um, of the town and those of the country. So urban and rural. Trade, or um, maybe trade between rural and urban in uh, dance. Yes. It consists of exchange of wood for manufactured produce, either immediately or by intervention of money, or of some sort of paper which represents money. The country supplies the town with the means of subsistence and the materials of manufacture. The town repays this supply by sending back a part of the manufactured produce to the inhabitants of the country. The town in which there neither is nor can be any reproduction of subsistence may very properly be said to gain its whole wealth and subsistence from the country. We must not, however, upon this account imagine that the gain of the town is the loss of the country. The gain of both are mutual and reciprocal, and the division of labor is in this, as in all other cases, advantageous to all the different persons employed in various occupations into which it is subdivided. The inhabitants of the country purchase of the inhabitants of the country purchase of the town a greater quantity of manufactured goods with the produce of a much smaller quantity of their own labor than they must have employed had they attempted to prepare them themselves. The town affords a market for the surplus produce of the country, or what is over and above the maintenance of the cultivators, and it is there that the inhabitants of the country exchange it for something else which is in demand among them. The greater the number and revenue of the inhabitants of the town, the more extensive is the market which it affords to those of the country, and the more extensive that market, it is always the more advantageous to a greater number. Uh, the corn which grows within a mile of the town sells there for the same price with that which comes from 20 miles distance. But the price of the latter must generally not only pay the expensive the expense of raising it and bringing it to the market, but afford to the ordinary profit of agriculture agriculture to the farmer. That the proprietors and cultivators of the country, therefore, which lies in the neighborhood of the town, over and above the ordinary profit of agriculture gain uh, in the price of what they sell the whole value of the carriage of the like produce that is brought from more distant parts, and they save beside the whole value of this carriage in the price of what they buy. Compare the cultivation of land in the neighborhood of any considerable town with that of those that lie some distance from it, and you will easily satisfy yourself about how the country is benefited by the commerce of the town. And I'm writing that uh, neighboring much the country. Yeah, just gonna say rural. Neighboring rural areas benefit from their, say, distance. Yeah, distance from the town. Yes. Um, yes. Among all the absurd speculations that have been propagated concerning the balance of trade, it has never been pretended that neither the country loses by its commerce with the town or the town by that of the country which maintains it. As subsistence is in the nature of things prior to conveniency and luxury, so the industry which procures the former must necessarily be prior to that which ministers to the later. The cultivation and improvement of the country, therefore, which affords subsistence, must necessarily be prior to the increase of the town, which furnishes only the means of conveniency and luxury. It is the surplus produce of the country only, or what is over and above the maintenance of the cultivators, that constitute the subsistence of the town, which can therefore increase only by the increase in the surplus of the produce. The town indeed may not always derive the whole subsistence from the country of the neighborhood, or even from the territory to which it belongs, but from very distant countries, and this though it forms no exception from the general rule, has occasion considered considerable variations in the progress of opulence in different ages and nations. Okay, so what he's telling us here is that those living in the rural areas would never, or that there will always be a balance of trade, and they will always be willing to trade with one another. Those living in the rural areas uh, would always be willing to sell. However, they will only sell after they have subtracted what they want for themselves. So let's assume that they are producing tomatoes. Well, I'm going to take the amount that I and my family needs, and then I'm going to sell the rest to the town. Now, the town is going to produce something. And the idea is that what I sell to the town may not be enough, and therefore a lot of other people also need to sell to the town. So the town is buying from many vendors. Yeah, from a lot of small countries or rural areas in modern terms, and it might be these cities might be so big that they actually need to buy from foreign countries, right? Yes. So the order of things, which necessarily imposes, in general, um, though not in every particular country, is in every particular country promoted by the natural inclination of man. If human institutions had never thwarted those natural inclinations, the town could nowhere have increased beyond what the uh, improvement and cultivation of territory in which they were situated could support, till such time at least as the whole of the territory was completely cultivated and improved upon equal or nearly equal profits. Most men will choose to employ their capital rather in the improvement of cultivation land than choose to employ their capitals then neither in manufacture. Okay, I'm gonna start again from with this sentence because something happened with my eyes. Okay, so upon equal or nearly equal profits, most men will choose to employ their capital rather in the improvement and cultivation of land than either in manufacturing or foreign trade. So that's his argument, right? That's the thing that he's always arguing for. Okay, the man who employs his capital in land has it more under his view and command, and his fortune is much less liable to accidents than that of trade, who is obliged frequently to commit it, not only to the winds and the waves, but to the more uncertain elements of human folly and injustice, by giving a great credit in distant countries to men with whose character and situation he has seldom be um, thoroughly acquainted. The capital of the landlord, on the contrary, which is fixed in the improvement of his land, seems to be as well secured as the nature of human affairs can admit it. So the beauty of the country, besides the pleasure of country life, a tranquility of mind which it promises, and whatever the injustice of human laws does not disturb it, the independent which it really affords have charms that more or less attract everybody. And as to cultivate the ground was the original destination of man, so in every stage of his existence he seems to retain a predilection for the primitive employment. Interesting. Interesting. So now he becomes a little bit thoughtful. He becomes a little bit romantic, I would say. He becomes a little. Yeah, I'm actually going to write that. Romantic. Adam is a little romantic about living in rural areas and doing agriculture. Right? He's a little bit romantic about it. He's fascinated with the life, and he says there's always something that intrigues you about it: the silence, the emptiness, and that this is what every man is supposed to do, to see plants grow and to cultivate the land. Well, he's a little bit of a romantic. Without the assistance of some artificers, indeed, the cultivation of land cannot be carried on, but with great inconveniency and continual interruptions. Smiths, carpenters, wheelwrights, and plowers, mowers and bricklayers, tanners, shoemakers and tailors, and people whose whose service the farmer has frequent occasion for. Such artifact, artifacts too stand occasion in need of the assistance of one another, and as their resident is not like that of the farmer, necessarily tied down to a precise spot, they naturally settle in the neighborhood of one another and thus form a small town or village. The butcher, the brewer, and the baker soon join them, together with many other artificers and retailers necessary or useful for supplying their occasional wants, and who contribute still further to augment the town. So he's really describing how towns come to be. I suppose that also comes from the title. So maybe I'm gonna write that, how towns are formed. Okay, let's see how where we are. The inhabitants of the town and those of the country are mutually the servants of one another. It's actually a good sentence. It's actually a pretty good sentence. The town is a continual fair or market to which the inhabitants of the country resort in order to exchange their wood for manufactured produce. It is this commerce which supplies the inhabitants of the town both with the materials of their work and the means of their subsistence. The quantity of the finished work which they sell to the inhabitants of the country necessarily regulates the quantity of the material and provisions which they buy. Neither the employed nor subsistence, therefore, can augment, but in proportion to the augmentation of the demand from the country for finished work. And this demand can augment only the proportion to the extension of the improvement of cultivation had human institutions therefore never disturb the natural course of things. The progressive wealth of the progressive wealth and increase of the town would in every political society be consequential and in proportion to the improvement of the cultivation of territory and land. Had human institutions never disturbed the natural course of things, progressive wealth of increase in town and political society be consequence and in proportion to the improvement of cultivation and territory of land. And this, of course, relates to the idea of wars and things like that. Okay, in our North American colonies, where uncultivated land is still to be had upon easy terms, no manufacturers for distant sale have ever yet been established in any of their towns. When an artificer, I actually want to know how to pronounce this word because I kind of know what it means, but um, where is it? This is how you spell it, right? Mm, artificer. So this means a skilled merchant in armed forces or a skilled craftsman, and that relates to the shoemaker and and the bricklayers and tanners and tailors and things like that. Yes. So when an artificer has acquired a little more stock than is necessary for carrying on his own business in supplying the neighborhood country, he does not in North America attempt to establish with it a manufacture for a more distant sale, but employs it in the purchase and improvement of uncultivated land. From artificer, he becomes planter, and neither the large wage nor the easy subsistence which the country affords to artificers, can bribe him rather to work for other people than for himself. He feels that an artificer is the servant of his customers from whom he derives his subsistence, but that a planter who cultivates his own land and derives his necessary subsistence from the labor of his own family is really a master, an independent of the world. So artificers are servants to their customers, while that a planter who called while I'm just going to write it as is, but it means a farmer basically. A planter who cultivates, but in today's world, right? Like you can do both, I suppose. Um, because it's a little bit well, I suppose that's also what he's saying here, right? That you get rich and then to a certain point you want to provide for yourself, right? You're not going to try to expand upon your business, let's say, but you're going to expand into your independence, right? So expansion into independence, I suppose. Yes. In countries, on the contrary, where there is neither no uncultivated, so maybe this relates expansion into independence when uncultivated lands exist. And that's, of course, the really difficult thing to find today. So, in countries, on the contrary, where there is no uncultivated land or none that can be had upon easy terms, every artificer who has acquired more stock than he has employed in his occasional jobs of the neighborhood endeavors to prepare work for a more distant sale. The smith erects some sort of iron and weaver some sort of linen and wool manufacture. Those different manufactures come in process of time to be generally subdivided and thereby improved and refined in a great variety of ways, which may easily be conceived and which it is therefore necessary to explain any further. In seeking for employment to a capital, okay, maybe I'm gonna write that when uh, there is no uncultivated land, then expand, then the artificer expands business. Okay. In seeking for employment or to a capital, manufacturers are upon equal or nearly equal profits. Naturally, naturally preferred to foreign com- naturally preferred to foreign commerce for the same reason that our agriculture is naturally preferred to manufactures. As the capital of the landlord or farmer is more secure than that of the manufacturer, So the capital of the manufacturer being at all times more within his view and command is more secure than that of the foreign merchant. In every period, indeed, of every society, the surplus part both of the root and manufactured produce, or that for which there is no demand at home, must be sent abroad in order to be exchanged for something for which there is some demand at home. But whether the capital which carries this surplus produce abroad be a foreign or a domestic one is of every little importance. But whether the capital which carries this surplus produce abroad be a foreign or domestic one is of every yes, okay. If the society has not acquired sufficient capital both to cultivate all its lands and to manufacture completeness manner in the completest manner the whole of its root produce, there is even a considerable advantage that the root produce should be exported by foreign capital in order that the whole stock of the society may be employed in the useful purpose. The wealth of ancient Egypt and that of China and Hindustan sufficient demonstrates the nation may attain a very high degree of opulence, though the great part of the exportation trade be carried on by foreigners. The progress of our North American and West Indian colonies would have been much less rapid had no capital but that belonged to themselves been employed in exporting their surplus produce. According to the natural course of things, therefore, the greater part of the capital of every growing society is first directed to agriculture, afterwards to manufacture, and last of all, foreign commerce. I'm going to highlight this because today I read an article about the Chinese belt, and it was exactly these thoughts that I had, that let them build it. Let them build it if that's what they want. Because it's a bad investment. They should, and that's of course after me really reading these and getting these ideas from Adam Smith. Let them do it. It's bad investment. If that's what they want, then okay, let them lose. Let them waste their capital. Let them put their capital into work in other places where it shouldn't. It's not. Yes, you're going to increase your GDP, but it's artificial. It's not true growth. It's not true growth, right? They should focus on agriculture. They should not be getting pork from Denmark. They should not be getting their agricultural necessities from the United States. They really want to to grow. They should focus on themselves for now, I think. And from here, it seems like they're just making a shift, a 180 shift, right? From doing no commerce at all to now them wanting to actually do the commerce. Because I think this is a note to have. This is something that I need to write down. If not enough capital is invested in agriculture and manufacturing, then it should definitely not be invested in transport and foreign trade. And really what we're saying here is that investment of capital, your agriculture, is preferred to manufacturing, which is preferred to transport. So this order, let's continue. because I think this is the last paragraph I will be reading, because then we're in chapter 2. This is quite a short chapter actually, but yes, let's read it. This order of things is so very natural that in every society that had any territory, it has always, I believe, been in some degree observed. Some of their lands must have been cultivated before any considerable towns could be established, and some sort of coarse industry of the manufacturing kind must have been carried on in those towns before they could well think of employing themselves in foreign commerce. Makes sense? Because you have nothing to provide the foreign commerce, right, at that point. But though this natural order of things must have taken place in some degree in every such society, the modern state it has in all the modern states of Europe been in many respects entirely manufacturers, or such as were fit for distant sale. The manufacturers of foreign commerce to, together have given birth to the principal improvement of agriculture, the manners and customs which the nature of their original government introduced, and which remained after the government was really altered, necessarily forced them into this unnatural and retrograde order. Interesting. Now it really becomes his critique of how societies have developed in Europe. Really look forward to reading that. And as I told you previously, chapter 2 has the following title: Of the discouragement of agriculture in the ancient state of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Interesting idea, right? Why have we stopped agriculture? Why is agriculture not a priority anymore after the fall of the ancient of the Roman Empire? Okay, so to sum up, what have we talked about? Well, we've talked about the natural progress of countries, and the idea is that first you have the cultivation of land, and after that, those people will produce something that's enough for them and enough to give other people. Now, those other people, they will maybe not find it sufficient, or let's say that enough land have been cultivated, and we still have some people. Well, those people will offer to do something else. So maybe let's stick with the tomatoes. Now maybe they will make tomato paste, tomato soup, right? So a kitchen. Maybe I produce the food for the city, right? Maybe I make pizzas. And then suddenly, this farmer, well, of course, before the pizza is made, the farmer maybe needs his clothes. Maybe someone will produce the clothes for all the farmers. Someone will take care of the shoes of those farmers and things like that. And that's how cities develop. Now, the urban, no, the rural people, right? So those working on the farms will produce enough for themselves and enough for the town. And maybe not enough for the town, and therefore the people living in the urban area will have to take from different rural areas and maybe also take from foreign trade. So that was the first thing that we talked about, the trade between the urban and the rural inhabitants. And that there is always a balance here, naturally. Now, of course, there can be some political issues that have led to some inequalities. Okay. And then we talked about this idea of neighboring rural areas benefit from the distance from the town. So the closer you are to the town, or the cheaper it is for you to to transport this product to the town, and therefore the more profit you can earn yourself, and the more of the manufactured good at that town you can buy. Okay. And then we really read a small section of how Adam was romantic about and romanticizing about living on the land, where and then he described how towns are formed, and that's what I alluded to with the tomato thing. Uh, and then he started to discuss, well, what if we have a country with uncultivated land, right? Such as, I suppose, the northern colonies that relates to the North American colonies that relates to Canada. Okay, what does he say about that? Well, he says that these artificers, so the shoemaker, the guy who makes a pizza, who makes the pizza, will not expand to make another pizza place, but rather he would be buying some of this uncultivated land and then produce his own goods such that he can, well, produce enough for himself and his family. And why would he do that? Because being an artificer is providing a service, uh, and he's viewed as a servant to his customers. That's understandable, right? Because, as we say today, customer is king. So people working in El Giganten, for instance, an electric company here, not an electric company, but an electric retailer here in Denmark, for instance, right? They have to take care of the people that come into the shop, make them happy, and that's an artificer, a computer maker, for instance, in today's terms. Of course, these are not. It's not a perfect example, but let's think of it as a perfect example. So what will they do? Well, if you have a lot of uncultivated land, well, I will buy this land and produce for myself. Because, as alluded to, the artificer is a servant to his customer, while the planter who cultivates his own land is his own master. So it's about having this freedom, right? Yes. However, he then says that in countries where there is not a lot of uncultivated lands, or maybe it's very difficult to get your hands on this uncultivated land, which may be because of the price. So we've already expanded on it, but maybe some we have not expanded on it. I mean, but he has expanded on it. Or maybe I actually meant that the country has already expanded a lot, which means that you would have to buy it from a different person, and that person would want to rent, and therefore it would be more expensive uh, in respect in comparison to the country with the uncultivated land, right? So there, the artificer would just invest into a new shop or into more production, right? So he can earn a profit that way. Now he also goes to say that a country that has not enough capital to invest in agriculture or manufacturing should definitely not invest into foreign trade. He says that in old times you had Egypt, Hindustan, and China that were great wealthy nations, and they did not invest into foreign trade. However, it was the foreigners that came into their country and then traded with them. And notice here that there is an investment in the foreign trade, right? So, and therefore, money spent on foreign trade that you could otherwise have spent on agriculture or manufacturing. So he says that that's wasted money if you have not developed yet, and you still have some land that can, or some agriculture that can be expanded upon, and manufacturing that can be improved. And therefore, he says directly that agricultural employment of capital into agriculture is preferred to that of manufacturing, which is preferred to that in in transport and foreign trade. And that's how we ended. And then it's time to find a question for next time. And I really want to think about this Silk Road of China, right? Does it produce something? Um, does investing or employing capital into transport, transport and foreign trade have any externalities that makes it more attractive than investment in agriculture and manufacturing? It's a great question, eh? That's a good question. And here I mean maybe the political power that those countries will earn, right? Or maybe that they will then have people employed. But yeah, let's see. Let's see. That's a question for next time. Oh, forgot. I have like a small thread here that I put to know where I am in the notebook. Uh, I forgot to put that in. I'm just gonna check if there's any questions. There are none. So yeah, I think that's it for today. That's it. That's the podcast. That is basically the podcast. Actually, that's actually the podcast. Okay, so let me. Yeah, thank you for today. Thanks for listening. It's earlier than otherwise. However, as I said, I have some other things that I need to do, trying to increase the quality of the podcast. You'll be seeing some small clips also, and I'll also be trying to share this with people a little bit more. Or now I will actually share it with people. It's not only the people that I interact with occasionally. So now maybe we will get more viewers. Maybe we'll get famous. Who knows? Maybe people like it. Hopefully people like it, right? Because I like it, and the people that I've told about it like it. So let's see. As per usual, thank you for listening. Take care. But there is a motivation at the end. There's always a motivation. I actually don't know what today's motivation is going to be about. I had a lot of motivation in the past couple of days. Motivational topics, I mean. Uh, and there was one that I was saving for today, but I really can't seem to remember it, which is a little bit frightening. But what was yesterday's motivation about? Actually, let me just take a sip of water. I think yesterday's motivation was about your surroundings. Yes, having positive surroundings. Um, yes, 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 yes. I th- I think no. I've had this motivation about before. The one with if you have a task that only takes 2 minutes, then do it right away instead of waiting. We've also had measuring. Everything that can be measured can be managed. We've also had friendship. Hmm. We've also had the idea that when everything feels lost, just keep on going because it will somehow do itself. And then we've also had have a schedule. We've had a lot of motivations, and we've talked about a lot of things during these podcasts. We've also had about consistency and having a routine. I think we've also had about I don't think we've had about hard work, but that is commitment and dedication and routine, right? Because it is hard work to have a routine. It's not easy. What will motivate me? What really motivates me at this point is having quality, and of course that's also relates to what I will be doing later this night. It's already 11, but I will be working a little bit on it. It's quality. Um, it's and mostly not only quality, because what has led me to quality, to wanting to increase the quality, well, it is to put myself out there. um, and I don't think you should be afraid of putting yourself out there. I think it's good that you're making something. It's better than other people that are not doing anything, firstly. And secondly, you can only improve if you do something. Because if you're not doing anything, well, you're still at point zero. Point one is better than point zero, right? Improving little by little is better than being afraid of putting yourself in a place where you will be criticized too much. Now I know I myself is am quite anxious, and I'm quite afraid of doing this, and that's why I'm going to increase the quality a little bit before I publish it. I don't know how much the quality will actually increase, but at least it will increase to some degree. But I really, uh, I really think you should do it. Don't be afraid of talking to people and telling them really what you think, because we all keep it to ourselves. Of course, there are some things that are just wrong to think, right? Thinking that the Holocaust didn't happen or things like that. It's just not okay. But to think that you're good enough, to think that you're allowed to have an opinion about things, that's totally fine. To think that you've worked on this and it's worth showing off, show it off. However, of course, don't be very egoistic and narcissistic about it. Be very modest. Being so there is of course a trade-off here, but there is a balance as well, right? So being modest, but also showing a little bit of yourself. Because if you don't show anything, then people will not know what you're thinking, what you're doing. They might think of you as something that you're not. Maybe that you're lazy, but you're not lazy. I don't know what people think of me. We've also had a motivation that you should not care about what people think of you. However, you should be willing to exchange and trade ideas with them. And that's what the idea of this podcast is that I talk and then I listen to what you think, and then I try to respond to that, and we try to expand with one another our worldview, right? So today's motivation is about putting yourself out there and being willing to take the critique, being strong enough. to take that critique, believing that you actually have something to give to the world and to offer the world. It's about not standing out, but just standing up for yourself. Sometimes I think that I'm schizophrenic, but I know I'm not. However, it is a mechanism that I've created such that I kind of do stuff, right? So I know that I have a personality somehow that's a little bit afraid of how people think of myself. Then I have a different personality that thinks this person has really worked a lot. Let's try to help that person. And suddenly there is something in me that pushes me to be more open and to do things, right? It's about it's not only believing in yourself but giving yourself credit. One time I had a discussion with a young cousin that I've actually also been on this podcast, uh, and we talked about self forgiveness. If you're willing to forgive other people, why are you not willing to forgive yourself? And that's the same thing. If you're willing to spend some time listening to other people, why are you not willing to put your things out there and have people listen to you? Do you not think that you have something to offer? You think that you should be silenced and you should only listen and stay mute? No, of course not. Of course not. We're all unique on our different ways, and every single person have something to offer, and they have an opinion, and that opinion may add to the common prosperity of all the nations. I did not say that nation or that family or that town. I said all the nations, because maybe someone in the previous Hindustan, uh, in Indonesia, listens to you and he feels motivated to do something, or he also thought about that, and then you come together and you help one another. Maybe someone in Greenland, maybe someone in New Zealand, maybe someone in the United States of America, right? So that's my motivation. Be willing to put yourself out there and be willing to it's not forgiving yourself, but to promote yourself and to have fun and to believe that you have something to offer. I think that's motivation. See you tomorrow and take care of yourself. And as per usual, I love you all. You'll get the two blinks. And I put my finger up until the end of this podcast.